안녕하세요. 토크살롱 시청자 여러분, 서울스피커스뷰로의 알렉스입니다. 1960년대 초에 채팅형 인공지능이 처음 개발되었고 요 수십 년간 연구와 개발을 통해서 챗봇이나 가상비서 같은 것들이 개발됐죠. 그러나 그 어느 모델보다 지난해 말 우리에게 공개된 챗GPT의 모습은 굉장히 놀라움이었습니다. 바로 거대 언어 모델을 바탕으로 자연어 처리로 진행되는 모델이라는 점 때문인데요. 이제 우리는 교육이나 의료, 금융이나 고객 서비스 등에서 챗GPT를 활용해서 보다 편리하고 그리고 신속한 답을 제공할 수 있게 되었습니다. 오늘 이 자리에는 이데일리 IT 컨버전스 포럼의 기조연사로 참석하신 미국 클린랩의 커티스 노스컷 대표님을 모셨는데요. 우리 사회의 인공지능에 대한 이야기를 나눠보도록 하겠습니다.
It is my first time. A bit about myself. I run a company, CleanLab. Did my PhD at MIT. I worked with Isaac Chuang for 8 years at MIT. He's the inventor of the quantum computer. I discovered that you can transfer that to machine learning data. And some of the same concepts that are being used in quantum physics can be applied to data sets in machine learning. If you want to understand a quantum computer, you have to understand a bunch of sort of noisy signals in the computer system. And so a lot of the work I did at MIT was to discover how you can take some of these concepts from quantum computing and apply them to machine learning. Over the last 15 years, I've worked sometimes just internships, sometimes very long, for several years at Microsoft, Amazon, Google, NASA, General Electric, Facebook AI, Amazon AI. And at every single one, without exception, I noticed that they needed a solution to improve the data that is driving the machine learning models and the ecosystem they're building on. And so I developed an enterprise solution for this, and that's how CleanLab got started. So the question is, sort of as these open source models are starting to get better, they're starting to reach the same limit, and yet how will this ecosystem still work? Because these are free. The open source models are free, but these are quite expensive. So won't people just start using these if the accuracy gets better? The answer is yes, but there's another answer that I think is important. What you'll see with open source as open source develops, and CleanLab is partially open source company. So we have both SaaS closed source products and we also have open source products. And what I've observed is that what people are paying for when they pay for closed source is not just the performance. They're also paying for the software ecosystem. They're paying for integrations. They're paying for services that make everything easier. And the way I like to think of this is that if you look at the last, say, 3 years, the number of open source models has increased exponentially, but there's only like 3 closed source models that people are using commonly. And so there's tons and tons of open source models, but just a few closed source. And every day that goes by, there's more and more of these open source models, but still just limited closed source. It's something like an airplane, and you buy a ticket. You have 2 options. So you can sit in the back, and there's tons of seats. Think of those seats like open source LLMs in the back. So they're free, they're not free, but they're cheaper. They're more accessible, and everybody can use them. And then there's up front, there's first class. Those are very expensive. But with first class, you get a lot of services. You get nice integrations with good services and food, and things are tasty, and it's comfortable, and it's easy to use. And people pay for that too. So the way I like to think of LLMs is the closed source will be a premier service. It has integrations, services, all of the software around it that makes it a nice ecosystem that big companies and small companies can just pay for in order to solve big problems without building software. But both of these get you from, say, San Francisco to Seoul, Korea. So I don't think that open source are going to overrun closed source or closed source overrun open source. I think there is an economy for both types of models. And my prediction, if we look into the future, is that 5 years from now, both will still exist. At CleanLab, we have something called the TLM, which stands for the Trustworthy Language Model. And this is a model that can wrap around other language models, but also underneath we have our own language model that we've trained on clean data, as you might expect. What this does is it improves both the reliability and accuracy of language models, including OpenAI's language models, but also open source language models. So the key takeaway here is we had a customer who was supporting some legal cases where lawyers were sort of generating content. You know, I can't go too into detail, but there have been cases, irrespective of our company, of CleanLab, but just there are cases that you can read about online where lawyers have generated entire closing arguments using things like ChatGPT. And they've gotten in a lot of trouble for this because people realized it because some of the arguments that they made were wrong
Right.
So this is very problematic.
Right.
And first of all, they probably shouldn't be doing that. But secondly, even if they are doing that, things like that are going to continue to happen. And how do we produce high quality outputs that we can trust? So that's why we created the trustworthy language model. And what this is for is every single sentence that is generated also comes with a trustworthiness score. So now when you're relying on these language models to do things automatically, CleanLab provides a way that it doesn't just provide an output, but it also provides the trustworthiness score that tells you how much you can rely on that output. And people might think, oh, well, how do I know that works? How do I know it's reliable? And nobody gives away sort of their proprietary information in this space. But there are ways that are very reasonable where you can understand why this might be reliable. And one of them is to just think, look, say that I asked an LLM the same question 25 times, but I changed the wording a little bit. I'd get 25 answers, but are they the same? So that's one thing you might do. Another thing you might do is feed in a bunch of good data and feed in a bunch of bad data and see how the LLM produces different outputs.
Oh.
So there are many different algorithms. We do a bunch of them, but what we've done is we've built a whole ecosystem that allows us to provide ways that you can say if these LLMs are producing reliable outputs. And then on top of those reliable outputs, you build solutions. So now when you generate, your closing argument, which I do not recommend doing with the LLM, by the way, but if you do that, you can check every sentence for how likely it is that it's actually a reasonable thing to say. In addition to that, if you're a customer service group or you're building some kind of chatbot as a financial service group or a bank, you're using these LLMs to generate content, marketing content. Now you want to know, is this marketing content correct? And you can automate it and send it all out, but if our trustworthiness score tells you that the trustworthiness of this statement is low, you have a human look at it first. And so this allows you to build a system of reliability, avoid hallucinations, avoid fake outputs, but still have the power and accuracy of these big companies, of OpenAI models, of open source models like Falcon, all within a single ecosystem. The key thing here is never to have perfection. What we're looking for is improvement.
Right.
If you want to start a company, I think it's good to encourage people, but in this one regard, I usually tell people don't do it. And if you are so motivated and you are so driven that even though someone is telling you don't do it, you still do it, then maybe you're cut out for it. The reality is that anyone who runs a big company, and our company is still small, we're growing, but we're still small. Big companies, the big successful ones, the Apples, the Nvidias, the Google, the amount of sacrifice that those leaders have made to build those companies cannot be counted. The personal loss, friends and family who they weren't there for because they were running the company. How can you spend your time being a good father and a good parent if you're spending all your time building a company? So you pay enormous costs. And I think part of the superpower of an entrepreneur, of a founder, is that they don't know that. So they start the company because in their mind they think, oh, I'm going to build this great thing. I can do it all. And they don't realize the cost. They don't know how much it's actually going to cost on them and their family and their friends and all their other dreams and goals. And so the reality is, if you want to start a big company, then there should be people in your life who tell you don't do it. And if even still you want to do it, then go ahead. But you should know ahead of time you're going to pay a tremendous cost. But you should just think to yourself ahead of time, is this something I really want to do? On the government business side, what I think, Korea and other countries can do today to help improve and enhance the AI ecosystem and also businesses' adoption of AI. One is, I think, bringing in speakers to share some of the latest research is good. And Korea already does that. They're really good at that. But two is, I think we can create tax incentives for businesses to be able to adopt new AI technologies that speed up the rate of production. Like, for example, you can imagine government deals with companies like CleanLab. What we do is we help speed up the rate of improving data and improving machine learning models. So you can imagine creating a tax incentive to use our technology for a Korean company. So now they can speed up the development of AI adoption at lower cost. And that's a very typical thing that countries do to be able to speed up innovation in the space. The final thing I would say is you have to start early with education. If you want to increase the adoption of AI, you have to start young. And it's a 20-year outlook, it's a long-term plan. But what it does is it allows you to have students learning AI at early ages, to use these tools, and to focus on creativity and adoption of how to use these effectively, instead of trying to learn, how do I code extremely well? You learn how do I use AI to code extremely well. And that person will be able to evolve with new technology, where someone who doesn't use AI at all will have trouble.
인공지능의 역할이 다양해질수록 인공지능에 대한 신뢰도를 다시 체크하고 또 일관되게 인공지능이 주어진 답을 무조건 수능하는 것보다는 인간이 주체적으로 선택할 수 있는 지혜가 더 중요해지는 시점이라고 생각하는데요. 오늘 어떠셨나요? 오늘 인터뷰는 여기서 마치고 다음에 더 좋은 컨텐츠로 찾아뵙도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.